Welcome back, everybody! How is everybody doing today? Welcome to episode 2 of the Platinum Trophy Online. This is our weekly gaming online live show where each week we dive into a different topic. We get my take on the topic, we get your take on the topic, and we discuss it for about an hour or so. Welcome if you're watching this live. Welcome if you're watching this not live over on YouTube after the fact. Thank you so much for tuning in today. How's everyone doing? How are you all doing today, guys? We've got a ton of people in here this morning. Good on you all for coming and tuning in today. Thank you so much. Now, on this week's episode of the Platinum Trophy Online, we're going to be discussing new IP for the PlayStation 5. What new IP do we want to see on the PlayStation 5? And we're going to treat this very similar to how we did last week. I'm going to have a bit of a ramble about the kind of games that I would love to see on the PlayStation 5. And then I'm going to throw it over to you guys, the audience, and we're going to take some suggestions from you about the kind of games you would like to see on the PlayStation 5. And we'll kind of have this big discussion of content and games that we'd like to see on the console. We've also got a bunch of submissions that you guys left over on the community post that we're going to be going through as well, and we'll be looking at those and taking some feedback from those discussion points. What I've got here is a bunch of submissions from you guys, the audience, who left comments on the blog post about this week's episode, and I think it'll be a really good place to start there. We can go through some of these submissions of things people would like. That kind of gives us a bit of a bouncing off point. Then also talk about a couple of the games I would love to see on the console, things that I think are either lacking on the PlayStation ecosystem or just in gaming in general this generation. And then I want you guys to also contribute, and I'll be taking your things that you want to see on this generation as well. So, alright, so some of the suggestions that came through on the blog post, we're waiting on some of these comments to start popping through. Adam Stevenson says he'd like to see a kind of two-player Naughty Dog game like Uncharted and The Last of Us. Or can we bring back Indiana Jones? I don't even know if Imbalama Jonas would work anymore in a game. I think Uncharted is basically Indiana Jones, right? Like, I don't know if an Indiana Jones video game would work. I guess it would just be Uncharted. Maybe there's like a slightly different sort of quirk to it, perhaps. I'm not really sure if that would even warrant sort of a game. I mean, maybe it's a slightly different take on it. But he's wanting to see a two-player Naughty Dog or Uncharted game, and this got me thinking: would The Last of Us or would Uncharted have benefited from like a co-op mode? Would those games have worked? Because they're so focused on narrative and that individual experience. If someone was playing, let's say The Last of Us 1, for example, would it have worked better if someone was playing as Joel and someone was playing as Ellie? Would that have worked? And it really did get me thinking, like, would that have been an enjoyable experience or not? I kind of tend to think that The Last of Us worked really well because it was like this solo single player experience that went from cutscenes to gameplay so seamlessly. I feel like if you and your buddy are sitting there playing as these two characters, and I could just imagine me and Steven playing, and then Steven making some sort of joke about waifus or something in a cutscene, and it would break the moment, right? It would break the entire impact or the emotional impact of whatever moment the developers were trying to get across. So I think like those emotional sort of games, I don't know if they would work co-op. I mean, they absolutely could, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. It's a great suggestion though, Adam, so thank you for that. I appreciate that. Maybe if they had, like, I've just seen Steven's comment pop here about factions, maybe if it was a cooperative based mode that was developed specifically for co-op, not just the game in co-op, for example. That could be a way of doing it. Morris left a comment here that he didn't finish writing. And I know Morris will watch the video of this if he's not watching live. The zombie genre is a bit dry currently in all gaming, and Sony hasn't tried it yet, so one could be fun. Thanks, Morris! Steven said, I misread. What about Demon Slayer? That would be sick. Or something more within the horror genre like a Nightmare Loop that just gets worse. So Steven is referring to PT here. I think he's edited his comment. I remember him saying PT. Are you talking about Demon Slayer, the anime Demon Slayer? But the comment here sounds to me like a PT thing, where like you're playing a game and it's a continuous loop that progressively gets worse. 100% on board with that, and I'm shocked we haven't seen a horror IP try and replicate what PT was doing yet. It's really bizarre that despite PT having been a demo available on PlayStation 4 since 2015, we haven't seen another company try and replicate PT as a horror. I mean, maybe somebody's working on it now, but absolutely I would love to see this. And this is one of my personal recommendations as well, would be a PT style game. I know that, what's that horror game with the art? It was like an art themed game. There was two of them. One was on a boat, one was in a house. It was about an artist. Layers of Fear. Thank you so much, David. God damn it. I hate it when you're sitting here and you've got like the idea, like this thing on your mind that you're trying to get out, and you're like, what am I trying to say here? David, thank you so much for squashing that bug. I appreciate it. You absolute bloody legend. And that kind of had a few vibes of PT, where you would have to progress forwards, and then to actually progress forwards further, you would have to go back and revisit areas as well. And I think they kind of started tiptoeing into the space of what PT was doing, but they didn't dive right into it. So yeah, absolutely, I'd love to see some sort of horror type experience that did that really played into that psychological aspect of horror, I suppose, is probably what I'm trying to say. Let's dive back. There's a couple of people talking about Last of Us, which I missed. Michael said here, The Last of Us needs a separate multiplayer like it has. I agree. I think Last of Us Online did work really well. I know people still play. Steven is a massive Last of Us guy. He's always on Last of Us. He's always playing. So I know that I think Last of Us Online absolutely could work. Yeah, it's something that The Last of Us Part 2 was like. You know, Last of Us Part 2 may have had even greater longevity of people playing it if they had included that as well. So yeah, who knows, right? Mike says he's really looking forward to a new God of War and a new Bioshock and Grand Theft Auto 6. Let's break all of these down a little bit. Because I think, you know, from the perspective of IP, I am looking forward to all of these games as well. Obviously, these aren't new IP. These are existing IP. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think having existing IP come across is a great thing as well as new IP. I'm really excited to see a lot of new stuff. I'm excited for older things to come back, and that's always great. But I'm really excited to see what new things Sony and other third parties bring to the table this time, because I think PS4, we didn't see a ton of new stuff. We saw a lot of redone stuff and rehashed stuff. We're kind of getting into this point of PlayStation now, where it'd be great to see them try some things new, try and do some things new. I mean, God of War, essentially, the new God of War game was basically a new game, right? They took an existing IP and they innovated on it to a completely new level where it basically wasn't anything like the original was. And God of War 2018 kind of ended up being, essentially, in my opinion, a completely new type of IP, despite it being based on an old IP. It's a reboot, but it was completely new. So that kind of gets passed. So God of War is the first one. Absolutely looking forward to God of War. I don't really know what I would like to see, though, from a new God of War game. Like, what would you guys want to see more from this new God of War game that the previous one didn't do? I guess from me, I would like to see them dive into more of the Norse gods, especially more of the Norse gods that we're aware of. I know in the first game they did tease a few of them, and there's a lot of gods in there that we may not have known so well from that Norse sort of lore. But it'll be really cool to see them kind of dig even deeper into that for the new God of War game, I would say. Maybe greater exploration as well. I don't know if there's much else though that I would like to see them change. Honestly, the original God of War game worked so well that I feel like they kind of nailed it the first time. Next is Bioshock. Now this is a scary one. Bioshock's a scary one. I don't know what they can do to make Bioshock as good as they made the first one. Now the first Bioshock game was so good. The first Bioshock game still sits on a pedestal as like absolutely one of my favorite games of all time. Bioshock 2 was fine. It was a good game. It just wasn't an amazing game. And then Bioshock Infinite was the same. It was a good game. It wasn't an amazing game. I really do hope that they can do something great with the Bioshock franchise. We're aware that they're working on a new Bioshock game. 2K has announced that. Who knows what that's going to look like, though. We just don't know yet what that's going to be. It does scare me. You know, in one sense, I'm thinking, well, maybe they go back to Rapture. They go back to the original Bioshock and they take some of what made that game really special there. That's kind of one side of it. The other side of it is maybe they do something completely different and separate. If they do something completely different and separate, they're not tainting the old. but they're also risking not hitting the highs of the old. I mean, or they're also risking hitting the highs of the old as well. I mean, I don't know what a new Bioshock game could do. What kind of dystopian city? I mean, maybe a colony on the moon or Mars or something could be quite cool, but then it becomes a space game. Maybe something like deep underground would be quite cool. I don't really know what else they could do. They did sky and they did ocean. It's kind of hard to top that with something else, huh? It's kind of hard. So Bioshock is absolutely something I would love to see, though. Muhammad said over here in the blog post that I posted, a single player IP that gives you a deep story to invest in. I mean, isn't that every Sony IP these days, though? A deep story to invest in. I feel like it's almost the Naughty Dog formula, right? It's deep characters with a backstory. Backstory is kind of flawed. Third-person action gameplay that everyone can get behind, everyone can kind of comprehend. Yeah, that's kind of like the Sony formula, huh? Switching between cutscenes and gameplay quite seamlessly. I mean, that's sort of it. That's sort of the formula. I think we've seen a few of those. Mike reckons a new Sniper Elite game. Sniper Elite 5. I honestly, I haven't played the Sniper Elite games, Mike, so I can't talk too much to those. But, I mean, I think I played Sniper Elite 3. But I know people are big fans of them, otherwise they wouldn't keep making them. So, obviously, they're super popular franchises that people keep on playing, otherwise they wouldn't be making more of them. So, hopefully you do see that. Now, Michael has a good suggestion here around Dino Crisis, Silent Hill. Dino Crisis is a franchise that's definitely ripe for coming back. I think if you get the right development team onto it to do a Dino Crisis reboot, that would be a really good IP to bring back, because a lot of people don't know what that is. A lot of people haven't played Dino Crisis back in the day. I think that would be a franchise that could work particularly well on the PlayStation 5 ecosystem, given, you know, how it's probably something not a lot of people have actually experienced. And I would even wager that a lot of people in my audience probably don't know what it is. So I think that would be a really, really solid one to bring back. Yeah, I agree with that, definitely. Silent Hill's the same. Silent Hill is one of my favorite franchises of all time. So it fits into a weird camp for me where they just seemingly haven't got a Silent Hill game right for so many years. To get Silent Hill right, they really need to go back to the basics of what made Silent Hill special. Focusing on a strong narrative, focusing on horror elements rather than combat, focusing on enemy placement and design, and really tapping into kind of like a more of a psychological horror. There's not a ton of games that have done that. You know, I wonder whether or not a Silent Hill game would work really well using some of those elements from Alien Isolation and from Resident Evil 7, where you have these procedural enemies that kind of traipse around the environment that aren't sort of being controlled by a specific pattern. They go wherever they want. They follow you through different environments. They follow you from A to B, and they kind of sit on their own little engine. I think something like that could work very well in terms of trying to make a Silent Hill game more scary. My fear, though, is that they would rely on old tropes, Pyramid Head, things like that, which aren't super relevant to a Silent Hill game, and that would probably be what I'd be afraid of with that. But I'd love to see another Silent Hill game, absolutely, if it was done right. I think the challenge with horror for developers and for publishers is that because it's such a niche genre, I would say, and the audience is so niche for those kind of games, they're not going to take as many risks on horror-type franchises, just because they're not going to see the return on them. You know, if Sony invests in developing a Spider-Man game or a Spider-Man sequel, God of War sequel, even a Ghost of Tsushima sequel, they're going to see an enormous investment on those games, whereas they take a risk on Silent Hill. You know, you're automatically cutting your audience in thirds by doing something like that because it doesn't appeal to everybody. You know, these kind of things I just don't see them taking enormous risks on. So while it's something I would love, I have to be realistic, but it is absolutely one of my picks as well. We need a Killzone reboot. Do we need a Killzone reboot though? Vuk, do we need that? I don't know if we need a Killzone reboot. I think Killzone to me, I don't know, man. Killzone to me felt kind of weird. It was fine, right? It was fine, but it was only fine. It wasn't amazing, I don't think. You know, I wonder, do we need a Killzone game when we already have a game like Call of Duty, for example? Like, what's Killzone doing differently? This is a genuine question to anyone in the chat. What's Killzone really doing differently and uniquely that Call of Duty's not already nailing? Why would someone opt to have Killzone as their main FPS game versus a COD game? You know, in my opinion, COD has kind of mastered first-person mechanics to a degree in terms of frame rate, in terms of gameplay, gunplay. I wonder whether or not a Killzone game would even be relevant. You know, something like Resistance, I think, absolutely has a space because it's a very different type of first person. Resistance is basically Ratchet, but in first person. You know, focusing on crazy weapons with multiple types of attacks that are just super unrealistic. And even the way you play Resistance is like Ratchet, where you kind of wander back and strafe more, versus a Call of Duty game where you're sort of shooting point A, B, and C. So I think that has a lot of points of difference compared to a Killzone type game, which I think fits a lot more into Call of Duty. But hey, I'm open to feedback if I'm completely wrong on that, which I could be. TPH says he would like to see a new version of PlayStation Home, not necessarily the same, but another place to hang out with friends and chat, life, sim, and discover some wicked indie games. Absolutely, dude. I think PlayStation Home would work a lot better now as well than it did back in the day. I think it would work so much better in a 2021 on PlayStation 5, way more than it would back on the PS3 before online gaming was so ubiquitous. Now though, we're online all the time, we're gaming online all the time, we're in party chats, we're doing this, we're doing that. Back on the PS3 that wasn't as common. So I think, yeah, PlayStation Home definitely could work. I would push that even further and say PlayStation Home, which is somewhat like a rec room in VR, I think would be very cool, utilizing PlayStation VR, tapping into a bunch of mini games. If PlayStation actually got behind it and developed sort of these hub worlds in VR that were based on IPs, so you could hang out in Ragnarok for God of War, you could hang out in Aloy's world, or New York from Spider-Man, whatever it may be. I think these would be some really cool things they could do as like a Second Life, PlayStation Home, Rec Room type VR experience. I think that'd be very, very cool. I mean, even not in VR, I think could still work. But I think VR is definitely something that could amplify that and elevate it to another level. So, pretty cool idea there, I think. Yeah, PlayStation Home would definitely, I'd be down for as well. I see you saying, yeah, maybe a trophy level unlocks certain items for your characters. Yeah, they could incorporate things like that. I feel like it would be more of a pay-to-win type situation because they probably want people to pay money to use the service. TPH says here that's how he discovered Zombie Burn, which was a fun little arcade zombie survival game. Really? So you found that from PlayStation Home? That's cool, man. Mr. Dozy says he would like to see a cover-based shooter with a horde mode like Gears of War, now that Uncharted has moved away from that direction. Yeah, Uncharted 4 didn't really do much of that, eh? They had like a light sort of horde mode. A Gears of War style, like, what do they call them? Like 3/4 cover-based shooter type game, I think could work quite well. We don't really have anything like that on PlayStation. Now, the challenge I would say with that is that kind of genre of game was very prevalent on the PlayStation 3 generation. That was pretty much every single third-person shooter on the PS3 was a 3/4 cover shooter game. As someone who played a ton of PS3 back in the day, I remember being like, this genre, it's been done to death so much. I think that could be one of the challenges. I think that kind of killed it a little bit because coming into the PlayStation 4, we sort of started seeing more third-person open world games rather than cover-based shooter games, first-person games, battle royale, that sort of thing. They sort of all started kicking off and taking over. So maybe it is a time for that cover-based shooter to come back, or maybe that sort of genre has been outdated. I'm not sure. Gears still seems incredibly popular, although I've played all the Gears games, including the new ones, and I would say that Gears feels very old and formulaic. I don't think they've innovated enough on Gears, especially in the new ones, to differentiate itself from that original trilogy. I think, despite them being great games, and games that I loved, I don't know if they've necessarily done enough to develop that. So yeah, it's an interesting idea. PS3 Gaming Scotland is saying, yes, he would like to see a Resistance game or reboot. Absolutely. I think Resistance is ripe for a reboot, remake, whatever it ends up being. You know, to be honest, just a new Resistance game. I think even if they scrapped all of what the original Resistance game trilogy did, can still exist, but maybe they reboot it similar to what they did with God of War. They release a new one with new character, new story, everything. Maybe they can reference the old stories as well. That means there's no requirement for people to have played the previous ones, which I think removes a barrier, which is important. But it's still set in that same universe with those same enemy types. I think that'd be a very cool thing to see. I loved Resistance on the PS3. It was one of my favorite franchises on the PS3, so it'd be very cool to see that. Mike reckons we need a Dante's Inferno remake. I don't know if we do need a Dante's Inferno remake. I think Dante's Inferno was pretty average game, to be honest, Mike. I'm sorry. I might be in a minority there. I didn't really enjoy Dante's Inferno. I don't know how you would make a remake or a sequel to that either, because it followed that ballad, right? I don't know if you could make a sequel to that. Now, I've got a couple that I want to talk about. So I'm gonna I'm going to let the chat sort of catch up a little bit, and I'm going to talk about a couple of the games I would really like to see. So the first one is more Western style games. I don't think we have enough cowboy or Western games on the platform. Red Dead Redemption is like one of the few that comes to mind. Name another cowboy game. I dare you to. It's not something that's done super frequently. Rockstar have done a great job with Red Dead Redemption and Red Dead Redemption 2, but I would really love to see another developer try and take on the West, cowboys, and that whole sort of thing. I think it's definitely something lacking. So for me, some sort of Western cowboy game is something I would like. I probably wouldn't want a publisher like Ubisoft to tackle it, because I think they would become too checklisty, too much like Assassin's Creed or other Ubisoft games. But I think, a developer like BioWare potentially... a developer like BioWare potentially could tackle a Western style game, and they could do justice to making sort of this Western RPG style game. I think that could be a very cool thing. Probably not someone who we want to talk about right now, but even CD Projekt Red could do something quite cool with that sort of style as a RPG. If we wanted to make it like an action adventure game, it'd be really neat to see Naughty Dog or even Santa Monica tackle something like that. Sucker Punch could do it. I would even say Kojima Productions could do something really cool in that Western style. But I would really, really love to see a sort of open world Western style game, whether it was a Western style action adventure game similar to Rockstar, or a Western style, not JRPG, RPG style game. I think that could be very cool. I think that'd be a really cool sort of IP to tackle, or a really cool genre to tackle. I think it's just something that we haven't seen a ton of. Red Dead 2 became a little bit too focused on realism more than being a video game. It's a tough one. It's a really tough one. And I think Red Dead 2 was exceptional, right? They did a lot of stuff that was really good, but they also did a lot of stuff that was really jank in that game. So it's one of those things. The other thing I would like to see, and I saw Morris mention this a little bit earlier on, was to do with PlayStation All-Stars. And he mentioned this a little bit earlier on in the chat. PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale, which was like a Smash Bros game. Now, the original PlayStation All-Stars, I really, really loved that game when it came out. I was a massive fan of it. Seeing all of our favorite PlayStation IPs come together, it sort of it was like a dream for a PlayStation fanboy, right? I'm sure a lot of people experienced something like that. Now, the game wasn't executed particularly well. That was the problem, right? They had this idea and they were trying to be Smash Bros, but then they were trying to be innovative at the same time, and it didn't work. It just didn't work. I would like to see them do something like that, but just do it better. I would say for a sequel. I think if they took what made PlayStation All-Stars special and what made people excited about that franchise, then that could be a really neat way of doing it, making sure they incorporate a lot of really salient and relevant IPs into it, making sure that they make the gameplay special. I think there's a number of things they could do to make it relevant for an audience today. So that's another one that I would love to see. Steven mentioned something about VR games. I don't know, do many of you guys play PlayStation VR? Is there any VR suggestions that you guys would have in terms of like a really solid PlayStation VR experience, or something that would be really good in PSVR that would work quite well? I'm a little bit lost, to be honest. VR really works for me when you're doing something completely unique. And for me, my favorite VR games are Rec Room and Beat Saber. They're two kind of experiences you can't get without PlayStation VR, so that's why they're kind of a special to me. I think, the PlayStation Home idea really for me is something that I think would work well in VR as a must-have VR experience. But otherwise, I don't really know any other VR things that I would like to see. I think VR has kind of done everything that I can kind of think of. So I guess I push that back onto the developers and the publishers to come up with something new and innovative that warrants PlayStation VR, hence why we need something like that. From my side, those two are the big ones. An All-Stars sequel, as well as sort of a Western type game. The other thing I would like to see is something else in the horror genre, like we talked about a little bit earlier on. That was my other thing I'd written down here. Something similar to PT that does something quite unique. Well, I love Silent Hill, and I like that style of game. it has been done. You know, I'd like, for the purpose of this thought exercise, I'd like to see something kind of new and unique. And that whole idea around PT really wasn't explored as well as it could have been, I don't believe. I think it was kind of dabbled with slightly, and then it kind of got left. And that's something I would definitely challenge a developer to try and do something with. You know, it could be something Kojima's potentially working on in the background as well. It's a bit risky though. It's more risky than a Death Stranding, just because the horror sort of side of things is just so much riskier than an action style game, which is going to sell so much better. So that's probably the reason we haven't seen it, actually. New IPs are hard, too much risk. How about renovations of existing IPs like God of War? Yeah, we talked about that at the beginning of the stream as well, Morris. God of War, I think, did a really good job of reinventing itself, and I think you are probably going to see more of that sort of style of thing where they reboot a franchise rather than completely come up with a new one. I think there is an enormous amount of risk, but I think the best time to release a new IP is when a new console generation rolls around. That's the safest time to do it, is when you start off a new console generation. That's when you can do it. If you wait too late into the generation, it becomes kind of irrelevant. Especially at the end of a generation, it's pointless. The safest and less risky time is kind of those first 3 years, which is when I think you'll see a lot of those new sort of IPs pop up. But I do agree, you know, a Killzone Tactics kind of game, it could be very, very cool, especially if they had the right developers working on it. Space Wipeout, again, something that hasn't been done that I think would be really cool, changing up their franchise and turning it into something completely new and unique. I think, you know, those are both really good suggestions, dude. I think those are really, really solid. All right, and with that, I think we might look at winding things down here. Yeah, and with that, I think that kind of wraps up this episode of the Platinum Trophy Online. I think we've covered off a ton of really exciting new IPs and new franchises or existing franchises that we want to bring back from Sony and from various third parties. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you enjoyed this episode of the show, give it a thumbs up. If you're a new viewer of the channel, don't forget to subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. And I'll see you guys all next week for next week's episode of the Platinum Trophy Online as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later.